Seahawks fans, wherever you may be. Welcome back for another edition of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. Join your host, Bill Alvstad, and co-host, sports writer and football analyst Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football.
Seahawks fans, welcome back to another episode of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, sitting down with co-host Keith Myers in our midweek show, here to talk about the Seahawks and the upcoming game to finish the year, as well as the matchup between the Detroit Lions and the Green Bay Packers on Sunday night. Seattle needs to take care of business to have a chance to get into the playoffs, but we also need a little bit of help. Need those Lions to defeat the Green Bay Packers at Lambeau Field Sunday night. A lot to talk about. We've also got some injury news and updates and so forth. And I know that we definitely wanted to spend a bit of time talking about Demar Hamlin as well. Welcome in, Keith.
I think we definitely should start there. I mean, I don't think we're reporting anything to anyone out there. I'm sure you have heard and or seen what happened on Monday Night Football, and the fact that they canceled the game. Technically, they suspended it first temporarily and then indefinitely, and now it looks like they're not going to play it at all, which is the right thing to do. I mean, you had these guys just watch their teammate have to get CPR. Including
cardiac arrest.
Including the use of a UAD to restart his heart, and you want them to go out and play football after that. These guys are gladiators, but man, you're looking at your mortality right straight in the face, just because he's one of them. He's one of the younger of them, and that's just downright scary. I don't know how that team goes out and plays a game this weekend against New England without having heard that their friend is like awake, conscious, okay. They're not focusing on football right now. They're not installing game plans or any of that stuff, which they should be doing if they're going to play a game.
Yeah, we're recording Wednesday afternoon, and as of the recording, he's still in the hospital in critical condition in the ICU unit, receiving oxygen. Understand he's made some improvements overnight and into today regarding his oxygen levels and so forth. Some other vital signs. Family members indicate that he's made some improvements and so forth, but we really don't know. I don't know exactly what the Buffalo Bills know. Probably not too much more than that as well. And you're right. It's hard to focus, would be almost impossible for almost everyone. And hopefully within the next 24 hours, 48 hours, they do get some indication of where he's at. Otherwise, this game would be very, very difficult to play, as you said, and prepare for, not only for the Bills, but for New England as well. It'd be hard knowing that they're going to go play a team that's just not ready, not mentally, not physically, just out of sorts, out of wax. I'm sure their thoughts are with Demar Hamlin as well, as well as the rest of the league. You know, everyone has kind of come out and said their piece. This is the first time we've recorded since that happened. I actually watched Monday Night Football live when it was happening. Kind of texted you. I was like, dude, you gotta see this. This is not good.
Yeah, because it was early first quarter. I'd made my kids dinner. Like, we were sitting down. I figured I'd go in, turn the game on. It's not a game that matters for Seattle, so I figured I'd watch the last three quarters and that would be good enough. And you texted me, and I'm like, I got to go look at this. And then it's like getting hit with a bus. Just start thinking about everything that's going on and everything that you're seeing, and
it wasn't even about football. Thinking about your kids, thinking about other people in your life that are important to you. All that kind of stuff kind of comes into mind there. Everything else regarding football was secondary. I thought the reactions live, on ESPN was really within what they needed to be doing. For the most part, it's really hard to have an instant reaction like that, especially when you don't know what's happening on the field for certain, and you're just kind of then speculating, which you don't want to do in this sort of situation. So I thought they handled it well. Obviously, the league made a decision ultimately to suspend that game, which was the only decision that they could make. The only surprising thing was it didn't come a little earlier in the evening, but all things considered, having this be something that was unprecedented, I thought that it was handled appropriately. And thoughts and prayers to Demar Hamlin for a recovery here. Chances when this happened did not look good at all. It's just one of those fluke things where the hit to the chest on a seemingly routine play caused his heart to stop, and so they got it going there on the field and transported him to a hospital. He's been there since, and it's just a tough deal. But getting back to this podcast and the show and talking about football, listen, this is what we do. We talk about football and so forth, but I thought it was definitely appropriate for you and I to take a few minutes to just talk about this and how it relates to just humanity and going past football and doing the right thing and give him our outpouring of support and thoughts, just like everyone else around the league is.
I was thinking about this the next morning, and what came to mind was a few years ago in Seattle with Ricardo Lockett.
That was scary.
Guy that's kind of buried down on the depth chart a little bit as a wide receiver, great special teams player, hurts his neck in a game, has to get carted off. We found out later that he'd torn the muscles and ligaments in his neck to the point where there was no stability. And if they had moved him wrong, it would have hurt his spine and he would have been paralyzed or died. It was literally life-threatening for him at that point. And the EMTs did right by him, the doctors did right by him. It doesn't matter that he never played football again. He gets to have a normal life with his family, and that's what mattered. And football doesn't matter, like those other things. Like, it made me think of that simply because how close was he from this being a massive tragedy? Not forget that it affected his football career, but that it affected the rest of his life.
Yeah.
And then, in this Hamlin situation, it's in the same realm. I mean, at this point, we don't know how this is going to end. It looks like things are going to trend upward and he's going to make some sort of a recovery, but we don't know. And it's just scary. We got to remember that these people out there, they're not robots. These are humans. They're people's kids. They have their parents, their friends, their cousins, their uncles. They're human beings. And we forget that sometimes with all of the X's and O's and strategy and salary cap ramifications and stuff that we do and we talk about and we think about with these games. But the human side of it, sometimes we need that reminder. And that's what this was.
This is an entertainment business and entertainment industry. And that's, first and foremost, what the business is. That's the business of football. But the business of football is made up of people. And, and this is one of those moments where the person takes precedence over the business, and as it should. Inherently, football is a violent sport. And I've thought about that a lot, not just in this instance, but over the course of my life. I played football at one point and ended up having not to play football again because of a hit to the spine when I was in high school. And it just reminds you that it can end at any time, whether it's an injury that takes you out or something worse. And normally in these circumstances, not in this particular situation, but normally players get injured all the time. It's a part of this sport, whether it's an ACL injury or a sprained thumb. And so these players do go out and put it all on the line all the time. That's why you hear about guarantees and contract talks and so forth. So, but I don't want to harp on that too much anymore. I just want everyone to know that we're thinking about Demar Hamlin, and it affects us, and I know that it affects everyone that's listening. And so I thought we'd just spend a little bit of time talking about that. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure that won't be the last time either.
Yep.
It's just one of those things. So today, beyond this little conversation, we were going to get together in this midweek show. Everyone knows that the Seahawks are playing this week, need to defeat the Rams at home on Sunday, but there's another game that happens that directly affects what happens with Seattle. Seattle needs to win that game against the Rams to have any chance. Mm-hmm. But once they win that game, there's another game. And the league happened to reschedule that game for a Sunday night game after Seattle plays, which is an inherent disadvantage to the Seahawks.
And it's also a violation of their own scheduling protocols. That game should not have been flexed. I get why they did it from a money standpoint, because that's the best game of the weekend in terms of playoff implications. It's a win in your end game. A lot of people are going to be interested. Plus, you've got the Detroit Lions that have been the doormats of the NFL forever, that are finally on the upswing and finally looking like they're going to turn this into being a good team. And Green Bay's a blue blood, right? And it's a win in your end for either team, maybe. And that's why they would flex it, but they have their own scheduling protocols in place on purpose, because if Seattle wins their game against the Rams, the Lions lose all incentive in their game in the evening. The game doesn't matter to them anymore because they're not making the playoffs. If Seattle wins, they've eliminated Detroit before Detroit even kicks off. And that just, you remove that fire from them, makes it easy for Green Bay.
And that's why these games are scheduled the way that they're scheduled normally. Now, Dan Campbell's come out and said, "Hey, listen, I understand why they flex this thing. It doesn't matter to us. No matter what happens in the earlier game, we're going to come out and we want to beat these guys for two reasons. A, I want my team to start to get used to playing in big games, and I want to beat the Green Bay Packers." And essentially the team has said just as much as well. So I'm hoping that he's a motivating factor in that respect, and he can get his team ready to play no matter what the outcome of the Rams Seahawks game is. Obviously, if the Seahawks win. And then, I don't know exactly what's going on here, why they scheduled it this way. They should have scheduled that for the same time as the Seahawks Rams game, or had the Rams and Seahawks flexed as well and played Sunday night. So both teams were fighting at the same time for the same deal. With that said, whatever. It's a game. We got to go take care of our business, and then it's out of our hands. And the Seahawks played into that situation where all they needed is one more game throughout the entire season, and they didn't make it happen. They've gotten this far, but they're dependent on somebody else to get into the playoffs, and that's on them. Hopefully they can learn from that in the future. Maybe they can get in this time. It doesn't matter. If they don't, they'll be thinking about that into next season.
Well, yeah. I mean, you look at the number of games the Seahawks have lost to bad teams, right? They lost to Carolina. They lost to Atlanta. They lost to the Raiders. Mm-hmm. Right? This should not be a situation right now where they need help. If you win any one of those games, then the Detroit Green Bay game doesn't matter. You take care of your own business, you're in. That's it.
Right. Yeah.
But they didn't take care of their own business earlier in the year, and now this is where they're at. If they end up not making the playoffs, they've only got themselves to blame. That being said, this is supposed to be the rebuilding year. This is supposed to be the year where this team bottoms out at 5 wins and starts rebuilding. Because they just traded away their quarterback. They traded away their Hall of Fame linebacker. They kind of tore this team down to rebuild it. And they're fighting for a playoff spot anyway. This says so much about Pete Carroll. It really does. That in the down year, in the year where they jettison a ton of talent, they're still right there fighting for a playoff spot in the last week of the season.
Yeah.
That's
and you
incredible.
can say that I completely agree with you on Pete Carroll. B, Geno Smith, it's a testament to Geno Smith and his story. I mean, the kid, I don't call him a kid. He's 32 years old. Has thrown for over 4,000 yards and 29 touchdowns. I mean, if I would have told you, and with a 70% completion percentage, if I would have told you that at the beginning of the year, you would have called me insane that those numbers were available to Geno Smith this year.
So we were looking at this Green Bay Detroit game. Jared Goff, of all people, has also thrown for over 4,000 yards,
which is remarkable,
and has 29 touchdowns. And he has 2 fewer interceptions than
he's having a great
Geno
year.
Smith. Having a great year. You and I have said a lot of things about Jared Goff because we watched him play, this entire career because he was with the Rams, and how limited their offense was with him in there and everything. He is having a phenomenal year.
Yeah.
And I think because it's Jared Goff, nobody's giving him credit for it.
He's leading his...
Honestly, I wasn't giving him credit for it until I started looking at these stats, and I was like, okay, this is way better than I ever would have expected, and we need to give him some credit. He's having a great year.
Yeah, not only that, he's leading one of the best offenses in the entire NFL. He's leading that team to 28.9 points per game this past 9 weeks. During that stretch, he's completed 65.8% of his passes, tossed 17 touchdowns against just 1 interception during this stretch, the 7-2 stretch. Their running game is legit. Jamal Williams had 144 yards rushing and a touchdown against the Bears. DeAndre Swift had 78 yards on the ground, 38 yards in the air. Jamison Williams is coming along, had a 40-yard run and catch combo after returning from the ACL he received in that national title game last year. Amon St. Brown, Ross St. Brown, has 100 pass catches this year and 1,112 yards on the season.
He's missed a couple of games because of injury too.
Yeah.
This isn't like, I mean, he's had some time where he wasn't playing and he still put up those numbers.
And their defense, Detroit's defense never gets any mention. And quite frankly, they played like crap for the first 10 weeks in the season. But the last 6 games, those guys are 5th time in 9 games have held opponents to 20 or fewer points. It's remarkable. I mean, the turnaround is just remarkable. So I got to hand it to Detroit. I think that this game is a lot closer than people realize. Green Bay, conversely, has also been playing better. They've won 4 in a row. Their defense has been playing better. They've forced 12 turnovers in the last 4 games during this win streak. The Seahawks have only had a couple, just as a comparison. So it's going to be really interesting. I think that the big factor here is outdoors at Lambeau, but I just checked the weather and it's supposed to be 33 degrees on Sunday. They're playing a night game, so it's but the low is only supposed to be down to 23. So it's going to be somewhere in the middle, by kickoff and throughout the game. Light winds, clear to partly cloudy skies. So weather should not be a factor, is basically what I'm saying. And so it'll be interesting, Keith. I mean, but Seattle's got to go take care of business first. It's hard to talk about this game and not mention the Seahawks just got to go win theirs. But that's what needs to happen. A couple things. While I'm thinking about it, Jordan Brooks, we knew that he injured his knee. It was confirmed, had the ACL. It's going to have surgery. Team placed him on IR. Tyler Mabry was signed to the 53-man roster as a roster replacement. So they've got 4 tight ends on the roster, which is kind of interesting, bizarre, but they're going to run 13 personnel quite a bit. They ran 13 personnel in this last game, which is 3 tight ends on the field. I imagine that's going to be an important strategy going forward, considering teams were starting to shut down the wide receivers. And this gives them a little bit more options to be able to run the ball effectively as well, with 2 tight ends in, and then the third tight end in also to peel out and give Gino an outlet as well helps.
Interestingly, in this game, even with 4 tight ends active and playing, they brought in Jake Curran as a 6th offensive lineman, which basically puts him at tight end. He just has to report eligible every play. And so they were really playing with 5 different guys playing at a tight end position.
They were determined to run the ball. The other thing I noticed too, Keith, with Ken Walker too, is his determination to run between the tackles and to just really put his nose in there now with, some determination. I think before he was just trying to stretch everything out or bounce things outside. So I thought he did a lot more to just kind of grind out some things, which is good to see. And still had some opportunities. That 60-yard run he had was between the tackles, just off the right guard. And then he cut that thing outside as soon as he got past the line of scrimmage, and he was gone. So it's kind of cool. Seattle worked out 5 players this week, signed cornerback Chris Steele and Connor Weddington to the practice squad. Wide receiver Connor Weddington, undrafted rookie free agent out of Stanford in 2021, was on Seattle's practice squad for a minute, was released and bounced around a little bit, mostly with the 49ers on their practice squad. So those are interesting signings. But that's it. The other guy they worked out I thought was really interesting that they didn't sign was quarterback Carson Strong, the Nevada quarterback, undrafted out of the 2022 draft. Thought maybe he would go in the 6th, 7th round, had tons of passing yards. Not sure why he's bouncing around. He's had several tryouts I've seen with many teams. And the Eagles signed him, right after the draft, but he was released and just really hasn't caught on with anybody since.
Yeah.
That's it. That's all I've got on us. I mean, we can talk endlessly about football and about these games, Keith. Is there anything that you wanted to talk about that's left with this Lions Green Bay game?
Well, I was just looking. I was kind of. We both know that Seattle's defense has been maligned, and they were just awful for a while. And they got good, and then they were awful again, and then they've been better. And so I started just looking at some stats and that kind of stuff. And the Lions are, technically have one of the worst defenses in the league too, even though they're both playing better. The Seahawks have given up more rushing yards than the Lions have, but only by 20 out of in that games. But the interesting thing is both of them are right around 2,400 yards given up, which is a ton of yards on the ground. And that is twice as much as the San Francisco 49ers, who have given up 1,260 yards all season on the ground.
Wow.
I looked at that. I'm like, that is such an interesting stat to me. That is just crazy.
Well, considering that those stats kind of go hand in hand with the offense in a sense, in that when you fall behind in games, your running game goes away. So that points to me that, that the Lions are falling behind, and then they're just throwing it like crazy. That's and Jared Goff's, he has 4,000 yards. Geno's got 4,000 yards. It's interesting how that works.
Yeah.
That's a lot of yards by Seattle and Detroit.
Yep. But they're not the worst 2 teams in the league. There's 2 more. Both the Houston Texans and the Chicago Bears are worse.
Wow. Yeah.
And then but when you look at passing yards against, the the Lions are third from the bottom again. They were fourth from the bottom against the rush. They're third from the bottom against the pass. They've given up 3,991 yards through the air, which, like I said, is third from the bottom. The Seahawks are right up in the middle, right up in, I think in 16th overall, which I kind of expected it to be worse, just given how awful the defense was for so many games. But to see that their pass defense is average is kind of surprising.
If I just had to say, without really knowing exactly how it breaks down, I would say that our passes against us, in the long ball, 20 plus yards, explosive plays is probably league average. We've got some pretty good corners, but underneath, our linebacker and safety coverage underneath is pretty weak, and teams have been throwing it underneath. And that kind of plays into the way Pete Carroll likes to play defense anyway, which is soft underneath and not let anything get past you. Interesting. Yeah. So what do you, just quickly, and we'll come back for another show anyway on the Seahawks Rams, but how are you feeling this week as far as Seahawks Rams? I mean, I really haven't spent too much time, honestly, even looking at the matchup yet, because, well, obviously, certain things have happened to distract us, but how are you feeling as far as just, are we going to win this thing? Are we going to give us a chance to get this done?
I think the Seahawks do have a chance to get this done. I mean, the Rams are still without their stars, right? They've shut everybody down. They know the season's over. They're running Baker Mayfield out there as their quarterback, and yeah, I mean, they've shut things down. The talent level just isn't there. Seattle should be able to handle it, but at the same time, like they've shut down their stars, but the guys that are out there are still playing hard. It's a really well coached team.
Yeah.
So you don't want to take them too lightly. But I mean, Seattle should win this, especially now that they've refound their footing offensively. And you're going up against a defense that's been decimated by injuries, no Aaron Donald, all of that. Seattle should be able to run the ball. They should be able to move the ball, score some points. That shouldn't be a problem.
Yeah, and they've been playing better on defense too, even in their losses. The offense kind of got sidetracked for a while, but I think teams figured them out as far as just being able to shut down that run and box Geno in a little bit. And with that, the 13 personnel, I thought that they ran out there the last couple of weeks with the tight end sets really was the difference, actually, in picking up third down conversions and exploiting some of the defensive alignments against the Seahawks. Because when you're double teaming DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, you're going to leave somebody open, and often it's the tight ends. And if you're running three out there, somebody's going to be left unopen. Or
even if they're not left open, you end up with Colby Parkinson, who's 6'7", being guarded by a 5'8" cornerback, and that's just easy.
Yeah,
for Geno.
Right.
And you saw that a couple times in this game,
especially in the tight end, where he was open for the touchdown. Geno was so patient on that throw and just threw it to the right spot, right person. And they scored on that. So I'm kind of anxious to see this because teams that have really good secondaries, especially in the playoffs, if we get that far, this gives us another option to be able to keep the offense flowing. So they can't really shut down any one aspect. And the way that that Ken's been running the last couple of weeks, 200-yard games in a row is also encouraging, especially against the Jets. I mean, the Jets were a pretty decent team, number 4 overall in the NFL defending the run. So I thought they did a good job.
Yeah, the problem with the Jets isn't their defense; it's their quarterback. All of them that have played, and a better quarterback, and that's a playoff team. And they were in the playoff like for most of the season, and they've faded here at the very end, and they're going to miss the playoffs this year. But they were in that conversation all along. So that's not a bad football team. It's not a typical Jets team, right? Because you're used to the Jets being just dysfunctional and terrible, and this is not that. They're well coached and everything. So I'm actually a little surprised we didn't see the 13 personnel more. this year,
Mm.
because you've had those 3 tight ends all year. They've now Disley is hurt and he's out. Mabry's now the guy there as the blocking tight end, but that still gives you 3 tight ends, and you should be able, like, given Fant and
I mean, when
Parkinson
Marquise Goodwin got hurt, I think that was the change.
Yeah,
and then a guy like Derek Young just wasn't ready, and Dwayne Eskridge has been hurt and not available, and when he has been in, he's just not been effective. And so, to me, having Colby Parkinson, I thought, to your point, should have probably been more instrumental in this offense the last 4 or 5 weeks. And who knows, but they made that adjustment, and I'm glad they're doing it now. Because if they are going to be in the playoffs, they got to give themselves a chance. You don't want to get completely embarrassed. I think this does. Having that running game, the 3 tight ends, gives them a chance, and the defense seems to be improved. I'm a little worried about Jordan Brooks being out there just because our situation at linebacker was weak to begin with. So we'll just have to see how it goes, on the defensive side, especially at safety and linebacker, what they do there to solve that deficiency in talent will be interesting to me. Probably just go with a different, with a additional defensive back in some capacity. I would think probably solves that.
Yeah, but you still have Cody Barton in there as the linebacker in the middle instead of Jordan Brooks.
But Cody Barton did look good against, in this last game against the Jets, but it's just one game.
It is one game. And I mean, Jordan Brooks is a special player. There's a reason why every year that he's been here, he's been, in the top 5 in the NFL in tackles. Now,
we've been a little hard on him this year.
This year, he hasn't done as good a job of getting up and making those tackles at the line of scrimmage or behind the line of scrimmage, but he's also getting blocked a lot, and he's not getting any help from up in front of him, but he's still fighting through blocks and making tackles. They just happen to be a little further downfield than we'd like.
Yes.
Cody Barton has had times where he can't make a tackle because he misses.
Cody Barton's looked better the last 4 or 5 weeks. I think that he's turned the corner a little bit as far as, because I haven't seen him wildly being out of position. I think that he's actually been quite a bit better in coverage and in tackling, not missing tackles and so forth the last 4 or 5 weeks. So we'll see. Again, and Ryan Neal's out, so you've got Abram. God, I just lost his name. Jonathan Abrams, come in and play, likely to start this week. He's not a bad player. Obviously, we saw his stone hands last week when he had an opportunity to catch the ball, but decent tackler and a physical player. So essentially,
but he
taking
was also someone they brought in off the street mid-season.
But he was a former first-round pick. I mean, he's not horrible. He's just so bad in coverage. Teams have given up on him.
He's a safety who can't cover.
Jamal
I was
Adams, part 2.
Okay. But you have it's interesting to me because he is in there playing. I think it's more because he's the veteran and he's seen some things and they like that. But he wasn't the first choice to be the guy that is in for Ryan Neal. Tease Tabor was the guy who got the snaps initially. And then they've sort of worked Abrams in order to, get him more snaps and all of that. And he's kind of taken over. But it is interesting
to learn the defense a little bit.
Yeah, it is interesting that Tease Tabor was the guy that was getting the snaps initially.
Well, they went with the guy that was on the team for a minute there. So anyway, I think we can wrap this show up. The big takeaway for me is we've got to take care of our own business, and then we have to worry about Detroit's business. The Seahawks have to win. That's the common denominator. If the Seahawks don't win, we're out. If we win, then everyone's going to be watching that Detroit Green Bay game after the Seahawks game. I mean, there's probably going to be just as many Seahawks fans watching that game as Detroit and Green Bay, because that's the game that is going to dictate whether
honestly,
or not we get in.
I'm going to be rooting for Detroit no matter what happens to Seattle.
Absolutely. Me too.
Because even if Seattle loses, I want
They've
Detroit.
got a shot.
I want that if Seattle loses, then Detroit can make the playoffs if they win that game. And that franchise, especially the fans of that franchise, have just been they've just been abused. And if
Seattle loses and Detroit wins, they're in.
Yeah.
Green Bay's out. It's Detroit, Seattle, or Green Bay.
Those are the
for
only
the
three
last
options.
Seventh spot. And if Seattle loses and Detroit wins, they're in.
Yep.
That would be my favorite team in the playoffs if we don't have to face them. Well, obviously we're not going to face them this year, but I like Dan Campbell in that, what he said about the TV thing and the timing of the scheduling on the game. I believe him, actually. I think that he's a coach that's going to get his team ready to play no matter what. And even if Seattle wins, he's going to go in and take advantage of the opportunity to play a significant game, possibly a spoiler against Green Bay in his own division. I think that's more important to him than anything else.
He's got a really young team. And he was talking about the need to have these guys play in big games. And this is a big game. This is a playoff game.
Yes.
For them. And it's huge for their development as a team. And I do expect them to come out and look ready and whatever, even if Seattle wins and they've been eliminated. In part because when they were terrible a year ago, and losing game after game after game after game,
they fought hard.
They still continued to play hard and fight hard. And when they did finally win a game, the quarterback, the guy who caught the ball at the end of the thing, were both running to their coach to give their coach the big hug and all of that stuff, because that's the kind of person Dan Campbell is and why he's done such a good job there in Detroit. So I think they're going to do well. I'm rooting for them. I want them to win, even if it doesn't matter for Seattle. I still want Detroit to win, because anytime you can watch Rodgers pout, it's a better day.
I don't like Green Bay. I mean, I've got some friends that are Green Bay Packer friends. I just don't like Green Bay because they're good. They're a good team. They've played good. Aaron Rodgers is a good quarterback, has played well in meaningful games. And it's just one of those things. But you just don't, there's certain personalities, certain team personalities and so forth that you just don't like in the NFL, and they're one of them. Okay, so we'll come back later this week, and we're going to have a show previewing the Seattle Rams game properly, not just loosey-goosey like we did tonight. So you can find Keith on Twitter at Myers NFL. You can find me at NWChawk. You know where the show is at, and when you find it, make sure you hit the subscribe button, whether that's on your podcast platform or YouTube. We've got our own YouTube channel, and that'd be great. So until next time, go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NWChawk, Keith is at Myers NFL, and the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.